Hello, and welcome. It's good that you're here, settling in wherever you are, perhaps at the edge of sleep, perhaps simply looking for a moment of quiet in a world that so rarely pauses. You don't need to do anything right now, except listen, or let these words wash over you like a gentle tide. Tonight, we're going to travel together to some of the most peaceful places on Earth, places where the wind itself seems to forget its purpose, where the air stands so still that you could almost believe time has paused to take a breath. These are the windless places, the hushed corners of our planet where silence wraps itself around mountains and valleys and vast open plains. If you enjoy this kind of gentle journey through science and wonder, you're welcome to follow along for more, but there's no pressure, no urgency. Just rest and let's begin. Imagine, if you will, standing in a place where the air around you is so perfectly still that you can hear your own heartbeat. Not the dramatic stillness that comes before a storm, but a calm, enduring quiet that feels like the earth itself is holding space for you to simply be. These places exist, scattered across our world, and they teach us something profound about the nature of atmosphere, geography, and the delicate dance between land and sky. We often think of wind as an ever-present companion, rustling leaves, stirring curtains, brushing against our skin. But in certain rare locations, the wind takes a long, quiet rest, and what remains is a kind of peace that's hard to find anywhere else. The McMurdo Dry Valleys in Antarctica are among the most windless places on Earth, though this might surprise you at first. Antarctica, after all, is famous for its howling katabatic winds that race down from the polar plateau at terrifying speeds. But the dry valleys are different. They lie in the shadow of the transantarctic mountains, protected by peaks that rise thousands of meters into the frigid sky. These mountains act as a barrier, a kind of atmospheric shield that deflects the fierce winds up and over, leaving the valleys below in a pocket of extraordinary calm. The air here is so dry and so still that it resembles, in some ways, the conditions on Mars more than anywhere else on Earth. Snow rarely falls, and when it does, it evaporates before it can accumulate, a process called sublimation, where ice transforms directly into vapor without ever becoming liquid. The stillness here is ancient, patient, almost sacred. Within these valleys, the silence is not empty. It's full of subtle textures, the faint crunch of salt deposits underfoot, the distant creak of glacial ice adjusting to its own immense weight. Scientists who work here often speak of the profound quiet, the way sound seems to travel differently, or not at all, absorbed by the thin, cold air. There are no trees, no grasses, no animals larger than microscopic organisms living in the soil and the frozen lakes. The landscape is painted in shades of rust and gray and pale gold, minerals exposed by millions of years of erosion in the absence of moisture. Standing in one of these valleys, you would feel the stillness not just around you, but inside you, as if the lack of wind invites your own thoughts to settle, to become clear and quiet. The wind, you see, is born from difference. It flows because the sun heats the earth unevenly, creating pockets of warm air that rise and cool air that sinks, and the planet's rotation adds a twist, a spin, that sends these currents spiraling across continents and oceans. Wind is the atmosphere's way of trying to balance itself, to smooth out the wrinkles of temperature and pressure. But in certain places, the geography conspires to eliminate those differences, or at least to trap them in such a way that the air has no reason to move. The dry valleys are one such place, a natural laboratory where the usual rules of weather seem suspended. Not far from the dry valleys, though still within the vast Antarctic expanse, there are other pockets of calm. Lake Vostok, buried beneath nearly 4 kilometers of ice, exists in a realm of absolute stillness. The water in this subglacial lake has been sealed away from the atmosphere for millions of years, untouched by wind or weather or the passage of seasons. Above it, the ice presses down with unimaginable weight, and below, the water remains liquid, kept from freezing by the pressure and the faint warmth rising from the Earth's interior. This is stillness on a scale that defies human experience, a quiet so complete that it exists outside of time as we understand it. No breeze has stirred this water since before our species walked the earth. Closer to the equator, in the heart of the Atacama Desert in Chile, we find another kind of windlessness, though the reasons are different. The Atacama is one of the driest places on the planet, a high-altitude desert trapped between the Andes Mountains to the east and the coastal range to the west. The Pacific Ocean lies just beyond, but its moisture rarely reaches inland. Cold ocean currents create a temperature inversion, a layer of cool air trapped beneath warmer air, and this inversion acts like a lid, preventing clouds from forming and winds from stirring. In some parts of the Atacama, weather stations have recorded years, even decades, without measurable rainfall. The air is thin and still, and the silence is broken only by the occasional whisper of sand shifting or the distant call of a bird adapted to this harsh, beautiful emptiness. Walking through the Atacama at dawn, you would notice how the light seems to arrive without announcement. No rustling of leaves, no stirring of branches to mark the sun's approach. The landscape is stark, sculpted by ancient forces, but in the present moment, it feels frozen, as if waiting. The stillness here is not cold like Antarctica, but warm and dry, a different flavor of peace. The sky above is so clear, so free of moisture and dust, that it has become one of the best places on Earth for astronomical observation. Telescopes perch on the high plateaus, their lenses pointed toward distant galaxies, and the air's stillness means the stars barely twinkle, their light arriving steady and true. Temperature inversions, like the one that helps create the Atacama's calm, are a common feature in windless places. An inversion occurs when a layer of warm air sits atop a layer of cooler air, the opposite of the usual arrangement where temperature decreases with altitude. This warm layer acts as a cap, preventing the cooler air below from rising and mixing, and without that vertical motion, the horizontal winds also die down. Inversions can form in valleys, over deserts, in polar regions, anywhere the conditions are right. They create pockets of stillness, sometimes just for a night, sometimes for weeks at a time. In the Great Basin of the western United States, temperature inversions are common during winter. The basin is a vast, high-altitude region of valleys and ranges, and on clear winter nights, the air near the ground cools rapidly while warmer air lingers above. The cold air, being denser, settles into the valleys and stays there, trapped by the surrounding mountains. Wind, which normally mixes the atmosphere, is absent. The result is a deep, cold stillness that can last for days. Frost forms on every surface, delicate and intricate, and the silence is so complete that the snap of a twig can sound like a gunshot. People who live in these valleys speak of the quiet with a mixture of reverence and unease, a reminder that nature can be as still as it is fierce. The Black Rock Desert in Nevada, part of this same Great Basin, is famous for its vast, flat playa, a dry lakebed that stretches for miles in every direction. During certain times of the year, when the air is calm and the temperature inversion settles in, the playa becomes a mirror of stillness. The surface is so flat, so uniform, that it's used to test land speed records, vehicles racing across the hard-packed earth with nothing to slow them but their own limitations. But when those vehicles are absent, when the temporary city of Burning Man is packed up and left, the playa returns to its natural state, a place where the wind seems to have forgotten to blow. You can stand in the center and see the curvature of the earth, the horizon bending gently away in all directions, and the air around you is so still that you can feel your own warmth radiating back from the ground. Windless places often have a quality of timelessness, as if the usual markers of passing moments, the rustling, the stirring, the constant motion, have been removed. In the Danakil Depression in Ethiopia, one of the hottest and lowest places on Earth, the air can become so still during the heat of the day that it feels almost solid, a thick, heavy presence that presses against your skin. The depression is a geological wonder, a place where the Earth's crust is pulling apart, where volcanic activity and salt flats create a landscape that looks like another planet. The temperatures regularly exceed 50 degrees Celsius, and in that heat, the air shimmers and distorts, but it does not move. The stillness is oppressive, almost suffocating, but it's also mesmerizing, a reminder that calm is not always comfortable, not always gentle. The salt flats of the Danakil, like those in the Atacama and the Great Basin, are places where water once was but is no longer. Ancient lakes evaporated, leaving behind vast deposits of salt and other minerals, perfectly flat and blindingly white under the sun. These flats are natural wind traps, their smooth surfaces offering no resistance, no roughness to generate turbulence. When the air is still, it remains still, and the heat radiating from the salt create a kind of barrier, a shimmering curtain that keeps the atmosphere locked in place. Walking across a salt flat in windless conditions is a strange experience, your footsteps echoing in the silence, the horizon wavering like a mirage, the air so thick and hot that it feels like you're moving through water. In the deep ocean, far below the surface, there are places where the water itself is nearly windless, though of course, we don't usually think of underwater currents as wind. But the principle is the same, motion driven by differences in temperature and pressure. In certain deep basins, isolated by underwater ridges and trenches, the water can remain still for centuries, even millennia. The Mediterranean outflow water, for example, flows from the Mediterranean Sea into the Atlantic Ocean. But once it reaches a certain depth, it spreads out and slows, forming a layer that moves so gradually that it's almost motionless. The water here is dense and salty, and it sinks into the deep Atlantic, where it can remain for hundreds of years, drifting slowly, quietly, in the dark. These deep, still waters are not empty. They are home to creatures adapted to the absence of motion, to the cold and the pressure and the darkness. Slow-moving fish, delicate jellyfish, microorganisms that process nutrients at a pace that matches the water's own stillness. Life here has learned to thrive without the stirring currents that bring food and oxygen to shallower regions. It's a different kind of ecosystem, one built on patience and efficiency, where every calorie is precious and every movement is deliberate. The stillness of these deep waters is a kind of refuge, a place where the chaos of the surface world cannot reach. Back on land, the Salar de Uyuni in Bolivia offers yet another vision of windless beauty. This is the world's largest salt flat, over 10,000 square kilometers of brilliant white salt crust. And during the rainy season, a thin layer of water spreads across the surface, transforming it into a mirror that reflects the sky with perfect clarity. When the wind is absent and the water is still, the boundary between earth and sky disappears. You can stand on the Salar and feel as if you're floating in an infinite blue void, clouds above and below, the horizon lost in the reflection. It's disorienting and deeply peaceful, a visual representation of stillness that seems to extend forever. The Salar de Uyuni is also one of the world's richest sources of lithium, a metal essential for modern batteries. And beneath the salt crust lies a vast reservoir of brine containing millions of tons of this valuable resource. But for now, much of the Salar remains undisturbed, a place where flamingos wade through shallow waters and the air is so clear that you can see stars even in daylight, faint pinpricks of light against the pale blue sky. The stillness here is not just atmospheric. It's cultural, a reminder that some places are valued not for what they produce, but for what they are. In the high Arctic, on the islands of the Canadian archipelago, there are valleys and fjords where the wind can vanish for days at a time, especially during the brief summer months. The midnight sun circles the horizon, never setting, and the air warms just enough to create a delicate balance. The ice, which has held these landscapes in its grip for millennia, begins to melt at the edges, and the water flows in slow, quiet streams. The wind, which dominates the Arctic winter, pushing snow into drifts and carving sculptures from ice, takes a rest. The silence is profound, broken only by the drip of meltwater and the distant crack of ice adjusting to the warmth. Animals emerge from their winter hiding places, moving cautiously through the stillness, as if they too are surprised by the calm. Windless conditions in the Arctic can create something called a whiteout, though not in the way you might expect. When the sky is overcast and the ground is covered in snow, and the air is perfectly still, the light becomes diffuse, scattering in all directions with no shadows to define shapes or distances. Everything becomes a uniform white, and it's impossible to tell where the ground ends and the sky begins. People caught in these conditions describe it as deeply disorienting, a sensory deprivation where even the sense of up and down can become confused. But it's also strangely peaceful, a world reduced to its simplest elements, light and stillness and the self. The concept of windlessness is not just about the absence of motion, but about what that absence reveals. When the wind stops, we notice things we might otherwise miss. The way sound travels, or doesn't. The way light behaves, unfiltered by dust and moisture. The way our own breathing becomes audible, a rhythm that connects us to the stillness around us. In a windless place, the world feels more immediate, more present, as if the usual distractions have been stripped away, and what remains is just the essential fact of being here, now, in this moment. The Dead Sea, bordered by Jordan, Israel, and the West Bank, is another place where stillness is a defining feature. It's the lowest point on Earth's land surface, more than 400 meters below sea level, and the air above it is thick and heavy, dense with oxygen and minerals. The sea itself is so salty that almost nothing can live in it, hence the name, and the water is so buoyant that you float effortlessly on the surface. The surrounding landscape is harsh, a desert of rock and sand, and the wind, when it does blow, often skips over the depression, flowing from the highlands to the east and west without descending into the basin. On calm days, the Dead Sea is a mirror, reflecting the barren hills and the pale sky, and the air is so still that you can hear the faint hiss of evaporation, water molecules escaping into the atmosphere, leaving behind their salt. The stillness of the Dead Sea has made it a place of refuge and healing for thousands of years. The dense air and high mineral content are believed to have therapeutic properties, and people come from around the world to float in the salty water and breathe the heavy, calm air. There's something deeply restful about a place that feels so separate from the rest of the world, so removed from the usual rush and motion. The Dead Sea exists in its own time, its own space, a pocket of stillness in a region that has seen more than its share of turmoil. In the interior of Australia, the vast deserts and salt lakes create conditions that can be remarkably windless, especially during the cooler months. Lake Eyre, Australia's largest salt lake, is dry most of the time, a vast expanse of white and pale pink crust that shimmers in the heat. But every few years, when rains fall in the distant highlands, water flows down ancient river channels and fills the lake, transforming it into a shallow sea that attracts thousands of birds. During these rare flooding events, the air above the lake can become incredibly still, the water spreading out in a thin, glassy sheet that reflects the sky with perfect clarity. The stillness is temporary, a brief pause in the lake's usual cycle of dryness and heat, but it's all the more precious for its rarity. The Australian outback, in general, is a place of extremes, and windless days are part of that extremity. The heat can be intense, the air so dry that moisture evaporates almost instantly, and on calm days, the silence is vast and enveloping. The landscape seems to stretch forever, red earth and blue sky meeting at a distant, hazy horizon, and the stillness makes distances hard to judge. What looks like a nearby hill might be hours away, and the lack of wind means there are no sound to provide clues, no rustling of leaves, no whisper of grass. It's a landscape that demands respect, a place where stillness can be as dangerous as it is beautiful. In the high mountains of the Himalayas, there are valleys where the wind is blocked by surrounding peaks, creating pockets of calm even at altitudes where the air is thin and cold. These valleys are often home to small villages, communities that have learned to live in harmony with the stillness, building stone houses with thick walls to hold warmth, and terracing the slopes to grow barley and potatoes. The air here is so clear that the mountains seem close enough to touch, their snow-covered peaks glowing in the sunlight. And on windless days, the silence is profound, broken only by the sound of a prayer flag fluttering gently, or the distant ring of a bell from a monastery. The people who live in these high, windless valleys often speak of the peace they feel, a sense of connection to the land and the sky that's hard to find in busier, lower places. The stillness is not just a physical phenomenon, but a spiritual one, a reminder that there is value in quiet, in pausing, in simply being present. The mountains themselves seem to encourage this. Their immense, patient presence a counterpoint to the hurried pace of modern life. When the wind is absent, the mountains feel even more solid, more eternal, as if they are anchoring the world in place. In the deep caves of the world, windlessness is the norm rather than the exception. Once you descend below the entrance zone, where surface air can still circulate, the air becomes still, trapped in passages and chambers that have been sealed for thousands or even millions of years. The temperature in these deep caves is constant, matching the average annual temperature of the surface above, and the humidity is often close to 100%. The air feels thick and heavy, but also strangely comforting, a stable environment where nothing changes, where the outside world's weather and wind and seasons cannot reach. Caves like Lechuguilla Cave in New Mexico, one of the longest and deepest in the world, are places of extraordinary stillness. The passages wind for miles through the limestone, decorated with delicate formations, stalactites and stalagmites and helictites that grow at a pace so slow it's almost imperceptible, a few millimeters per century. The air in these passages has been still for so long that it's chemically distinct from surface air, enriched with carbon dioxide from the slow decay of organic matter and the respiration of the few microorganisms that live here. Scientists who study these caves must move carefully, aware that even a breath can disturb the delicate balance, that the stillness they're experiencing is a rare and precious thing. The stillness in deep caves is not just atmospheric, it's also acoustic. Sound behaves differently in these enclosed spaces, echoing and reverberating in ways that can be disorienting. A whisper can carry for hundreds of meters, and a shout can seem to come from everywhere at once. But when you stop making noise, when you simply stand still and listen, the silence is absolute, a kind of quiet that's impossible to find on the surface. It's a silence that makes you aware of your own body, your heartbeat, your breathing, the faint rustle of your clothing. It's a silence that invites introspection, that makes you feel small and yet somehow connected to something vast and ancient. In the polar regions, beneath the ice sheets of Greenland and Antarctica, there are subglacial lakes and rivers, hidden waterways that flow in total darkness, sealed away from the atmosphere by kilometers of ice. The water in these systems is under immense pressure, and it moves slowly, carving channels through the bedrock. But within the water itself, there's a kind of stillness, a lack of turbulence, because there is no wind to stir the surface, no temperature differences to drive currents. These are some of the most isolated ecosystems on Earth, places where life, if it exists at all, has been cut off from the rest of the biosphere for millions of years. Scientists have only recently begun to explore these subglacial environments, drilling through the ice to sample the water and the sediments below. What they've found is astonishing. Microbial life, adapted to the cold and the dark and the isolation, thriving in conditions that would seem impossible. These organisms live on the chemical energy released by the slow weathering of rock, a process that requires no sunlight, no oxygen, no connection to the surface world. They exist in a realm of perfect stillness, where time moves at a different pace, where the usual rules of biology are bent but not broken. The concept of a windless place is not just geographical, it's also temporal. There are times when the wind stops everywhere, brief moments when the entire atmosphere seems to pause. These moments are rare and fleeting, usually lasting only seconds or minutes, but they can be profound. Sailors speak of the doldrums, regions near the equator where the trade winds converge and cancel each other out, leaving ships becalmed for days or even weeks. The doldrums are not truly windless. There are still currents and eddies, but the overall motion is so slow that it feels like stillness, a frustrating, maddening calm that has trapped countless vessels throughout history. The doldrums occur because of the way the Earth's atmosphere circulates. Warm air rises near the equator, creating a low-pressure zone, and as it rises, it cools and spreads out toward the poles. This rising air is part of a larger circulation pattern called the Hadley cell, and where the air is rising, the surface winds are weak or absent. The doldrums are a natural consequence of this circulation, a band of calm that shifts with the seasons, following the sun's most direct rays. For sailors in the age of sail, the doldrums were a serious hazard, a place where food and water could run out while the ship sat motionless, the sails hanging limp, the sea a glassy mirror reflecting the sky. But the doldrums are also a place of strange beauty. The lack of wind means the ocean surface can become incredibly smooth, and the water is often filled with bioluminescent plankton that glow at night, creating trails of light with every movement. The sky above is often filled with towering cumulus clouds, their bases flat and their tops billowing upward into the stratosphere, and these clouds can produce brief, intense rainstorms that drench the deck and then move on, leaving the air fresh and the sea steaming in the tropical heat. The stillness of the doldrums is not empty. It's full of potential, a pause before the next phase of the journey. In the high-altitude plateaus of Tibet, the air is thin and cold, and the wind can be fierce, but there are also times when the wind stops completely, and the stillness is breathtaking. The plateau is often called the roof of the world, and standing on it, you feel as if you're on top of everything, the sky vast and close, the mountains stretching away in all directions. On windless days, the air is so clear that you can see for hundreds of kilometers, and the silence is so complete that you can hear the blood rushing in your ears. The Tibetan people have lived on this plateau for thousands of years, and they have a deep respect for the stillness, seeing it as a time for reflection, for meditation, for connecting with the spiritual dimensions of the landscape. The stillness of the Tibetan plateau is also scientifically significant. The plateau is so high and so vast that it affects the weather patterns of the entire region, and even the world. The thin air and intense sunlight create strong heating during the day, which drives the monsoon systems that bring rain to much of Asia. But at night, the air cools rapidly, and on windless nights, the temperature can drop dramatically, frost forming on the ground even in summer. This daily cycle of heating and cooling, combined with the plateau's elevation, makes it one of the most important climate regulators on Earth, a place where the stillness is not just local, but global in its impact. In the forests of the Pacific Northwest, there are rare days when the wind stops completely, and the ancient trees stand silent and still, their branches heavy with moss and lichen. These forests are usually alive with motion, the wind stirring the canopy, the rain dripping from the leaves, the streams rushing over rocks. But on windless days, the forest becomes a cathedral of stillness, the air thick with moisture and the scent of earth and wood. The silence is not absolute. There are still the calls of birds, the rustle of small animals, but the overall sense is one of profound calm, as if the forest is holding its breath. These moments of stillness in the forest are important for the ecosystem. They allow the moisture in the air to settle, condensing on the leaves and dripping to the ground, watering the plants and replenishing the soil. They also allow the sounds of the forest to carry further, so that animals can communicate over longer distances, and predators can hear the movements of their prey. The stillness is not a pause in the life of the forest, but a different rhythm, a slower, quieter pace that's just as vital as the more active times. In the deserts of the Middle East, there are ancient caravan routes that pass through valleys and wadis where the wind is often absent, sheltered by the surrounding dunes and rock formations. These routes have been used for thousands of years, and the people who traveled them learned to recognize the windless places, the spots where they could rest without the constant assault of sand and dust. The stillness in these places was a gift, a chance to recover, to tend to their animals, to prepare for the next leg of the journey. The desert, for all its harshness, has these pockets of peace, and knowing where to find them was a matter of survival. The wind in the desert, when it does blow, can be brutal, stripping the skin, filling the eyes and mouth with grit, erasing tracks and landmarks. But the windless times are different, the air warm and dry, the sky a deep, endless blue. The silence is vast, broken only by the occasional cry of a hawk or the distant rumble of a vehicle on a modern road. The desert stillness is not gentle. It's too hot, too dry, too unforgiving for that. But it has a kind of austere beauty, a reminder that peace does not always mean comfort. In the high lakes of the Andes, windless mornings are common, the air cold and thin, the water surface a perfect mirror reflecting the snow-capped peaks. These lakes are often sacred to the indigenous people who live nearby, places of pilgrimage and ceremony, and the stillness of the water is seen as a sign of the lake's spiritual power. The silence is profound. The only sounds the distant call of a condor or the soft lapping of water against the shore. The air is so clear that the stars remain visible even after the sun has risen, faint points of light in the pale sky. And the stillness makes you feel as if you're standing at the edge of the world, looking out into infinity. The stillness we've been exploring reaches into places where human beings have built their lives. And there, in the quiet corners of civilization, we discover how windlessness shapes not just landscapes, but the rhythm of daily existence. There are towns and settlements scattered across the earth where the air moves so rarely that residents mark the calendar by those few days each year when a breeze arrives. These are not merely statistical curiosities, but lived experiences, places where laundry hangs motionless for hours, where smoke rises in perfect vertical columns, and where the absence of wind becomes a defining characteristic of home. In the heart of the Turpan Depression in northwestern China, one of the lowest places on Earth outside of ocean basins, there exists a peculiar atmospheric stillness that settles over the land for much of the year. The depression sits more than 150 meters below sea level, cradled between mountain ranges that block the prevailing winds. Here, the air grows heavy and hot, and because it is trapped in this deep basin, it rarely moves with any force. The summer temperatures soar, sometimes exceeding 50 degrees Celsius, and yet the heat sits almost motionless, pressing down rather than sweeping across. Local residents have adapted their architecture to this stillness, building homes with thick walls and small windows, creating interior spaces that remain surprisingly cool despite the furnace outside. The lack of wind means that dust, once settled, stays settled, and the ancient irrigation channels called carres flow beneath the surface, protected from evaporation not by breezes but by the earth itself. Moving westward across Asia, we find similar pockets of calm in the intermontane valleys of Central Asia, where the great mountain systems create sheltered zones of remarkable tranquility. The Fergana Valley, surrounded by the Tian Shan and Pamir ranges, experiences long periods of atmospheric stillness, particularly during the winter months when cold air settles into the valley floor and remains there, undisturbed by external weather systems. This cold air pooling creates what meteorologists call a persistent inversion, where the coldest air sits at the bottom and warmer air floats above, and the boundary between them acts almost like a lid, preventing vertical mixing and horizontal flow. In these conditions, the valley becomes a reservoir of stillness, and the air takes on an almost liquid quality, heavy and slow-moving, reluctant to be displaced. The phenomenon of cold air pooling occurs in valleys and basins worldwide, and it represents one of the most reliable mechanisms for creating windless conditions. When the sun sets and the land begins to radiate its heat back into space, the air in contact with the ground cools. This cooled air, being denser than the warmer air above, begins to flow downhill under the influence of gravity, seeking the lowest point it can find. In a valley, this means that cold air accumulates at the bottom, sometimes reaching depths of hundreds of meters. Once this pool of cold air is established, it becomes remarkably stable. The cold air is too heavy to be easily moved by the gentle pressure gradients that might exist at higher elevations, and the surrounding topography shields it from stronger winds that might be blowing at mountaintop level. The result is a zone of profound calm that can persist for days or even weeks, broken only when a powerful weather system brings enough energy to mix the atmosphere, or when daytime heating becomes strong enough to erode the inversion from below. In the valleys of the Alps, this cold air pooling creates microclimates that have been known and utilized for centuries. Certain valleys in Switzerland and Austria are famous for their stillness, particularly in winter, when the inversion layer becomes so strong that villages at the valley bottom remain shrouded in cold, motionless fog, while ski resorts higher up bask in warm sunshine and gentle breezes. The contrast can be dramatic, with temperature differences of 10 or even 15 degrees Celsius over a vertical distance of just a few hundred meters. Residents of these valleys have learned to recognize the signs of strong inversion. The way the fog sits without swirling, the way sounds carry with unusual clarity through the still air, the way the cold seems to penetrate more deeply when the air is not moving to carry it away. The psychological experience of prolonged windlessness in inhabited places is subtle but real. Human beings are accustomed to the movement of air as a background presence, a gentle reminder that the atmosphere is alive and dynamic. When that movement ceases, when the air becomes truly still, there is a sense of suspension, as if time itself has paused. Some people find this deeply calming, a respite from the constant stimulation of a world in motion. Others find it unsettling, a silence that feels too complete, an absence that draws attention to itself. In windless valleys, residents often speak of the stillness in terms that suggest both comfort and strangeness, a quality of their home that sets it apart from the restless world beyond the mountains. The architecture of windless regions reflects this atmospheric character in ways both practical and aesthetic. In places where wind is rare, there is no need for the steeply pitched roofs that shed wind-driven rain, no need for the heavy shutters that protect against gales, no need for the windbreaks and shelter belts that are common in exposed landscapes. Instead, buildings can be more open, more delicate in their construction, with large windows and thin walls, with courtyards that remain usable even in the heat of summer because the air, though warm, is not oppressive in its movement. The traditional architecture of windless regions often emphasizes shade and thermal mass, using thick walls to moderate temperature swings and deep overhangs to block the sun, relying on the stillness of the air to allow these passive cooling strategies to work effectively. In the American Southwest, certain pueblos and settlements sit in locations that experience remarkable calm. The pueblo of Atacama, perched atop a mesa in New Mexico, is exposed to the sky but sheltered by the surrounding topography in such a way that it experiences less wind than one might expect at such an elevated position. The mesa itself disrupts the flow of air, creating eddies and zones of reduced velocity, and the pueblo sits in one of these zones, a pocket of relative calm in a landscape that can be quite windy just a few kilometers away. The residents have known this for centuries, and the placement of the pueblo reflects not just defensive considerations, but also an intimate understanding of the local wind patterns and a value of shelter from the constant drying effect of moving air. Windlessness also plays a crucial role in the formation and persistence of certain types of fog, and in some regions, this fog becomes a defining feature of the local climate. The Tule fog of California's Central Valley, for instance, forms during winter nights when cold air settles into the valley and moisture from irrigation and natural sources condenses in the still air. This fog can be extraordinarily dense and persistent, lasting for days at a time, reducing visibility to just a few meters. The stillness is essential to its formation because any significant wind would mix the fog with drier air above and cause it to dissipate. Instead, the fog sits motionless, a thick blanket that muffles sound and transforms the familiar landscape into something dreamlike and strange. Driving through Tule fog is an eerie experience, a journey through whiteness where the world seems to have contracted to just a few meters in any direction, and the absence of wind means that the fog does not swirl or thin, but simply exists, uniform and unchanging. Similar fog conditions occur in other windless valleys around the world. The Po Valley in northern Italy experiences frequent fog during the winter months, particularly in the areas farthest from the coast where maritime breezes do not penetrate. This fog, known locally as nebbia, can be so persistent that it affects daily life, transportation, and even health, as pollutants become trapped in the still air beneath the fog layer. The windlessness that allows the fog to form also prevents it from clearing, creating a feedback loop where the fog itself reinforces the stable atmospheric conditions that gave birth to it. The fog reflects sunlight back into space, preventing the ground from warming, which maintains the cold air pool, which maintains the inversion, which maintains the fog. Only a significant weather disturbance, a front or a strong pressure gradient, can break this cycle and restore movement to the air. The relationship between windlessness and air quality is an important one, particularly in inhabited valleys and basins. When air is still, pollutants from human activities, vehicles, industry, heating, cooking, accumulate rather than being dispersed. In valleys with strong inversions, these pollutants can reach concentrations that pose health risks, particularly for vulnerable populations. The windless conditions that might seem peaceful and calming from an aesthetic perspective become problematic from an environmental health standpoint. Cities like Salt Lake City, situated in a basin surrounded by mountains, experience wintertime episodes of poor air quality when inversions trap pollutants near the ground. Residents become acutely aware of the stillness during these episodes, watching smoke from chimneys rise vertically and then spread horizontally along the inversion layer, forming a visible boundary between the trapped air below and the cleaner air above. Yet, even in these challenging situations, there is something to be learned about the atmosphere and our relationship with it. The windless conditions make visible what is usually invisible: the movement or lack of movement of air, the layers and boundaries within the atmosphere, the consequences of our activities. In a windy place, pollution is quickly dispersed, carried away to become someone else's problem, or diluted to invisibility. In a windless place, we live with the immediate consequences of what we put into the air, and this can be a powerful teacher, a reminder that the atmosphere is not infinite, that stillness has its costs as well as its comforts. There are also places where human activity has intentionally created windless conditions, or at least conditions of greatly reduced air movement. Greenhouses and conservatories are designed to control the environment, and part of that control involves managing airflow. In a well-designed greenhouse, the air is still enough to allow efficient heating or cooling, but not so still that it becomes stagnant. The balance is delicate, and growers learn to read the subtle signs of air movement or its absence, the way plants respond, the way humidity distributes, the way temperature stratifies. In a sense, a greenhouse is a miniature windless valley, a place where the normal rules of atmospheric circulation are suspended in favor of human design. Clean rooms, used in manufacturing and research, take this control to an extreme. These are spaces where air movement is carefully managed to prevent the introduction of contaminants. The air is filtered in flows and laminar patterns, moving slowly and predictably rather than turbulently. In the most stringent clean rooms, the air might move at just a few centimeters per second, a speed so slow that it is barely perceptible. Yet this movement is essential to maintaining the purity of the environment. Standing in a clean room, dressed in the required protective garments, one experiences a kind of stillness that is both artificial and profound, a space where even the air has been disciplined into calm. The study of windless places has practical applications in fields ranging from agriculture to aviation. Farmers need to understand where cold air pools form, because these are the areas most susceptible to frost damage. A difference of just a few degrees and a few meters of elevation can mean the difference between a crop that survives and one that is destroyed. Orchardists in particular pay close attention to the microclimates of their land, planting frost-sensitive varieties on slopes where cold air drains away and reserving the valley bottoms for hardier species or for uses that can tolerate the occasional freeze. This knowledge is often accumulated over generations, a kind of inherited wisdom about the subtle behavior of air and temperature in a specific landscape. Aviation, too, must account for windless conditions, though pilots are generally more concerned with wind than with its absence. However, in certain situations, extreme calm can be noteworthy. When landing or taking off, pilots prefer to do so into the wind because it provides additional lift and shorter ground distances. In windless conditions, these benefits are absent, and the aircraft must rely entirely on its own speed and the efficiency of its wings. This is rarely a problem for modern aircraft, but it is something that pilots note: a different feel to the approach and departure, a slight change in the rhythm of flight. Windless conditions also affect the dispersal of seeds and spores, and in some ecosystems, this has led to interesting evolutionary adaptations. Plants that rely on wind for seed dispersal produce lightweight seeds with structures that maximize their time aloft, feathery plumes, or papery wings that catch even the gentlest breeze. In windless environments, such adaptations are less effective, and plants may instead rely on other dispersal mechanisms: animals, water, or explosive seed pods that scatter seeds mechanically. The flora of windless valleys and basins often shows a different distribution of dispersal strategies compared to windier regions, and botanists can sometimes infer wind patterns from the plant communities they observe. The same is true for fungi, whose spores are often wind dispersed. In still air, spores fall more or less straight down, and the spread of fungal colonies is correspondingly slow and localized. In moving air, spores can travel vast distances, crossing oceans and continents. The windless places of the Earth are, in a sense, islands of reduced biological exchange, places where the mixing of genetic material and the colonization of new habitats proceed at a slower pace. This can lead to increased endemism, the evolution of species found nowhere else, because populations are more isolated from one another. Insects, too, are affected by wind or its absence. Many insects are weak flyers, easily blown off course by even moderate breezes. In windless environments, these insects can navigate more effectively, moving from flower to flower or from host to host with greater precision. Pollinators such as bees and butterflies may be more efficient in calm conditions, and this can affect the reproductive success of the plants they visit. Conversely, some insects use wind to aid their dispersal, and in windless places, their spread is limited. The ecological web of a windless place is thus subtly different from that of a windy place, shaped by the presence or absence of this one physical factor, the movement of air. The sound environment of windless places is distinctive and worth contemplating. Wind generates a broad spectrum of sounds, from the rustle of leaves to the howl of a gale, and these sounds form a constant backdrop in most environments. In windless places, this backdrop is absent, and other sounds become more prominent. The calls of birds carry farther and with greater clarity. The trickle of water becomes a focal point of the soundscape. Human-made sounds, footsteps, voices, the closing of a door, stand out with unusual sharpness. There's a purity to the acoustic environment of a windless place, a lack of masking noise that allows each sound to be heard distinctly. This acoustic clarity has been valued in certain cultural contexts. Monasteries and retreat centers are sometimes located in windless valleys, not only for the physical shelter, but also for the quality of silence that such places offer. The stillness of the air contributes to the stillness of the mind, or so the tradition holds, and whether this is objectively true or simply a matter of perception, the experience of deep quiet in a windless place is undeniably powerful. The silence is not empty, but full, a presence rather than an absence, and it invites contemplation and introspection. Musicians, too, have noticed the acoustic properties of windless places. In the open air, wind can interfere with musical performance, carrying sound away unpredictably, creating unwanted noise, making it difficult for musicians to hear one another. In a windless environment, outdoor performances become more feasible, and the music can be heard as the composer intended, without the distortions introduced by moving air. Some outdoor concert venues are sited in locations that are naturally sheltered from wind, and the quality of sound in these places is often remarked upon by performers and audiences alike. The thermal environment of windless places is also worth considering in more detail. We have touched on the fact that still air allows temperature stratification, but the implications of this are far-reaching. In a windless room, for example, the air near the ceiling can be significantly warmer than the air near the floor, and this affects comfort and energy efficiency. Heating systems must account for this stratification, and in some cases, fans are used not to create a breeze, but simply to mix the air and eliminate the temperature gradient. In a windless outdoor environment, the same stratification occurs on a larger scale, with the warmest air at the top of the inversion and the coldest air at the bottom, and this can create habitable zones at different elevations with markedly different temperature regimes. The human body's response to windless conditions is mediated largely through the process of evaporative cooling. When we perspire, the evaporation of sweat from our skin removes heat and helps regulate our body temperature. Wind accelerates this evaporation, which is why a breeze feels cooling even if the air temperature is the same. In windless conditions, evaporation proceeds more slowly, and we feel warmer than we would in moving air of the same temperature. This is quantified in the concept of the heat index, which combines temperature and humidity to estimate the apparent temperature. But wind speed is also a factor. In still air, high humidity becomes particularly oppressive because the air immediately around our skin becomes saturated with moisture and, in the absence of wind, is not replaced with drier air. The result is that we feel hotter and more uncomfortable than the thermometer alone would suggest. Conversely, in cold, windless conditions, the lack of wind means that we lose heat more slowly than we would in a breeze. The layer of warm air that our body heats around itself is not stripped away, and this provides a degree of insulation. Mountaineers and polar explorers know that a calm day, even if very cold, can be more comfortable than a moderately cold day with strong wind. The wind chill factor quantifies this effect, showing how wind increases the rate of heat loss from exposed skin. In windless conditions, the wind chill is simply the actual air temperature, and the cold, while perhaps intense, is more manageable. The interaction between windlessness and humidity creates a range of microclimates that can be remarkably diverse even within a small area. In a windless valley, the humidity can vary significantly from one location to another depending on proximity to water sources, vegetation, and the degree of sun exposure. Near a stream or pond, the air remains moist, and this moisture, in the absence of wind, stays localized. A few hundred meters away, on a sunny slope, the air may be much drier. These humidity gradients affect not only comfort, but also the types of plants and animals that can thrive in each microhabitat. In desert regions where windless conditions are common, the management of microclimates has been refined to an art. Traditional desert architecture often includes courtyards with fountains or small pools. The evaporation of water from these features cools and humidifies the air in the courtyard. And because the air is still, this cooled, humidified air remains in the courtyard rather than being blown away. The result is a pocket of comfort in an otherwise harsh environment, a demonstration of how windlessness, often seen as a challenge, can be turned to advantage with thoughtful design. The phenomenon of dew formation is intimately connected to windless conditions. Dew forms when surfaces cool below the dew point temperature of the surrounding air, causing water vapor to condense on those surfaces. This cooling typically occurs through radiative heat lost to the night sky, and it is most effective when the air is calm. Wind would mix the air, bringing warmer air from above into contact with the surface and preventing the surface from cooling as much. In windless conditions, the surface can cool significantly below the air temperature, just a few centimeters above, and heavy dew can form. In arid regions, this dew can be an important source of moisture for plants and animals, and some species have evolved to take advantage of it. Beetles in the Namib Desert, for instance, have textured backs that encourage dew condensation, and they tilt their bodies to channel the water droplets toward their mouths. Frost formation follows a similar pattern. On clear, calm nights, surfaces can cool well below freezing, even if the air temperature remains slightly above zero. The frost that forms on grass, leaves, and windows is a visible sign of this radiative cooling, and it occurs most readily in windless conditions. Gardeners and farmers watch for these conditions with concern, knowing that a calm, clear night in spring or fall can bring a killing frost even when the forecast air temperature seems safe. The windlessness allows the cold to settle and concentrate at the surface, creating conditions more severe than the ambient temperature would suggest. The study of windless places also intersects with the field of boundary layer meteorology, which examines the lowest part of the atmosphere, the part in direct contact with the Earth's surface. The boundary layer is where most of the action happens, where heat and moisture are exchanged between the surface and the atmosphere, where friction slows the wind, where turbulence mixes the air. In windless conditions, the boundary layer becomes very stable, and the exchange processes slow down. Heat does not move efficiently away from the surface, moisture accumulates, and the air becomes stratified. Understanding these processes is crucial for weather forecasting, air quality modeling, and climate science. And windless conditions represent an important test case, a situation where the usual assumptions about turbulent mixing do not apply. In recent years, scientists have used windless places as natural laboratories for studying atmospheric processes. The stable conditions allow for precise measurements and controlled experiments that would be difficult or impossible in a more turbulent environment. For example, researchers studying the formation of frost or dew can work in windless valleys where the conditions are predictable and repeatable. Studies of radiative cooling, of temperature inversion dynamics, of pollutant dispersion and stable air all benefit from the natural stillness of these places. The concept of windlessness also extends beneath the surface of the Earth. In caves, The air is often remarkably still, especially in deep caves far from entrances. The temperature in these caves is typically constant year-round, reflecting the average annual surface temperature of the region, and because there is no sunlight to drive convection and no connection to surface winds, the air simply sits, undisturbed. Cavers sometimes report that they can feel the warmth of their own bodies radiating into the cold, still air, and that their breath, visible in the chill, hangs motionless in front of them. The stillness of cave air is so profound that it can be disorienting, a silence and calm that is almost absolute. This cave air, because it is so still, can also accumulate gases that would normally be dispersed. Carbon dioxide, being heavier than air, can pool in low areas of caves, creating hazards for explorers. Radon, a radioactive gas produced by the decay of uranium in rocks, can also accumulate in still cave air. These hazards are a reminder that windlessness, while peaceful, is not always benign, and that the movement of air serves important functions in maintaining a breathable atmosphere. In the ocean, there are also regions of remarkable stillness, though we tend to think of the sea as a place of constant motion. In the centers of the great oceanic gyres, the circular current systems that dominate each ocean basin, there are areas where the water moves very slowly and the surface can be glassy calm for days at a time. The Sargasso Sea, in the center of the North Atlantic Gyre, is perhaps the most famous of these. The winds here are often light and variable, the currents are weak, and the sea surface can be so still that it reflects the sky like a mirror. Sailors have long known these regions and given them names like the doldrums and the horse latitudes, names that reflect the frustration of being becalmed, of drifting without wind, of waiting for the air to move again. The doldrums, more formally known as the Intertropical Convergence Zone, is a belt of low pressure that encircles the Earth near the equator. Here, the trade winds of the northern and southern hemispheres meet, and their convergence causes air to rise, creating clouds and rain, but often leaving the surface winds very light or absent. Ships can be trapped in the doldrums for weeks, and in the age of sail, this was a serious problem. Supplies would run low, tempers would fray, and the crew would watch the horizon for any sign of a breeze. The term doldrums has entered the language as a metaphor for stagnation and listlessness, a state of being stuck, and it originates from this maritime experience of windlessness. The horse latitudes, located around 30 degrees north and south of the equator, are another region of frequent calm. Here, the air that rose in the doldrums descends back toward the surface, creating high pressure and clear skies, but also light winds. The name is said to come from the practice of throwing horses overboard when ships were becalmed and water supplies ran low, though the historical accuracy of this is debated. Regardless of the origin of the name, the horse latitudes are real, and they represent a significant band of the Earth where windlessness is common. In these oceanic regions of calm, the water surface takes on a unique character. Without waves to scatter the light, the surface becomes smooth and reflective. The color of the water can seem more intense, a deep blue or green that is almost hypnotic. Floating objects, seaweed in the Sargasso Sea, debris in the centers of the gyres, accumulate because there is no wind to drive them elsewhere. These accumulations have become a concern in the modern era, as plastic waste collects in the calm centers of the gyres, forming what are sometimes called garbage patches, though they are not solid islands of trash, but rather diffuse fields of suspended particles and larger debris. The biological communities of these windless ocean regions are also distinctive. The Sargasso Sea is home to a unique ecosystem based on the floating sargassum seaweed, which provides habitat for a variety of fish, invertebrates, and other organisms. The calm conditions allow the seaweed to persist and accumulate, and the ecosystem that depends on it has evolved in this specific context of stillness. In a windier region, the seaweed would be dispersed, and the ecosystem would not exist in the same form. The experience of being at sea in a calm is both peaceful and eerie. The ocean, usually a place of motion and sound, the crash of waves, the whistle of wind in the rigging, becomes almost silent. The water laps gently against the hull, and the ship drifts slowly, responding to subtle currents rather than to wind. The horizon stretches unbroken in every direction, and the sky and sea seem to merge. Time takes on a different quality, measured not by progress, but by the slow arc of the sun and the gradual shift of stars. For those who have experienced it, a calm at sea is memorable, a moment of suspension in a journey, a pause that could be either meditative or maddening, depending on one's frame of mind and the urgency of one's destination. Modern ships, powered by engines rather than sails, are not at the mercy of the wind in the same way. But even today, sailors and passengers notice the calm. A cruise ship passing through the doldrums might offer unusually smooth sailing, and passengers might comment on the glassy sea and the stillness of the air. The experience is a reminder that even in our technologically advanced age, we are still subject to the rhythms and patterns of the natural world, still moved by the presence or absence of wind. The atmosphere of Venus, our neighboring planet, offers an extreme example of atmospheric circulation and stillness in an alien context. Venus has a thick atmosphere that rotates around the planet much faster than the planet itself rotates, a phenomenon known as superrotation. Yet at the surface, beneath the crushing pressure and searing heat, the winds are surprisingly calm, just a few kilometers per hour. The atmosphere above moves at hundreds of kilometers per hour, but at the surface, where the air is dense and sluggish, the movement is slow. This is not stillness in the sense we have been discussing, but it is a reminder that wind and calm are relative, shaped by the specific conditions of each environment. Returning to Earth, we can consider the windless places that exist at the very smallest scales, the boundary layers around objects, the thin films of air that cling to surfaces. When you hold your hand out in a breeze, there's a layer of air, just a few millimeters thick, that moves with your hand rather than with the wind. This is the boundary layer, and within it, the air is nearly still relative to your skin. This layer provides insulation, and it is one reason why wind feels cooling. It disrupts this layer and replaces the warm, still air with cooler, moving air. Every object, every leaf, every blade of grass, every stone has its own boundary layer, a microenvironment of relative calm, even in a windy world. Engineers study these boundary layers because they affect heat transfer, drag, and other important phenomena. The design of aircraft wings, for example, is deeply concerned with managing the boundary layer to reduce drag and maintain smooth airflow. In some cases, engineers deliberately trip the boundary layer, causing it to transition from laminar to turbulent flow, because a turbulent boundary layer, paradoxically, can reduce overall drag by preventing flow separation. These are subtle and complex effects, but they all arise from the behavior of air very close to surfaces, where the wind, no matter how strong elsewhere, must slow to zero at the surface itself. The same principles apply to the surfaces of plants and animals. The fur of a mammal, the feathers of a bird, the fine hairs on a leaf, all serve to trap a layer of still air close to the body. This still air provides insulation, reducing heat loss in cold environments and, in some cases, reducing heat gain in hot environments. The effectiveness of this insulation depends on maintaining the stillness of the trapped air, and this is why wind is so effective at penetrating clothing and fur. It disrupts the still air layer and replaces it with moving air that carries heat away more efficiently. In the design of clothing, especially outdoor and cold weather clothing, the goal is often to create and maintain layers of still air. Down insulation works by trapping air in the spaces between the fine filaments of down feathers, and this trapped air, being still, provides excellent insulation. Synthetic insulations work on the same principle, using fibers to create a matrix that holds air in place. The effectiveness of these materials is compromised if the air can move through them, which is why windproof outer layers are important in cold and windy conditions. The concept of windlessness, then, operates at every scale, from the planetary circulation patterns that create the doldrums and the horse latitudes, to the valley inversions that trap cold air in mountain basins, to the boundary layers that cling to every surface, to the still air trapped in the fibers of a down jacket. At each scale, the principles are the same. Air, like any fluid, resists motion, and in the absence of forces to move it, it will remain still. The forces that move air, pressure gradients, temperature differences, the rotation of the Earth, are not uniformly distributed, and so there are places and times when those forces are weak or balanced, and the air settles into calm. Understanding windless places helps us understand the atmosphere as a whole, because the calm regions are not separate from the windy regions, but are part of the same interconnected system. The air that rises in the doldrums must descend somewhere, and it descends in the hoarse latitudes, creating the calm there. The air that flows down into a valley at night must come from somewhere, and it comes from the slopes above, where the cooling air begins its descent. The stillness in one place is often connected to motion in another, and the patterns of wind and calm across the earth are the result of the atmosphere constantly seeking balance, constantly adjusting to the uneven heating of the surface by the sun. This search for balance is never complete, and so the atmosphere is never truly at rest. Even in the stillest places, there are small motions, eddies, and currents that are too subtle to feel, but that are there nonetheless. The instruments of meteorology, sensitive anemometers and thermometers, can detect these tiny movements and temperature fluctuations, and they reveal that absolute calm is rare. Yet there are moments, and there are places, where the air comes as close to stillness as it ever does, and in those moments and places, we can experience a quality of peace and quiet that is increasingly rare in our busy, turbulent world. The stillness we have traced across valleys and oceans extends now into the vertical dimension of the atmosphere itself, where layers of air arrange themselves in quiet stratification. Temperature inversions create not only surface calm, but entire columns of stable air that resist mixing, resist turbulence, resist the very impulse toward motion. These invisible architectures of stillness rise hundreds or even thousands of meters above the ground, forming what meteorologists call stable boundary layers, regions where the atmosphere settles into a kind of hushed equilibrium. Within these layers, air parcels remain at their assigned altitudes, neither rising nor sinking, held in place by the gentle but firm hand of density differences. The warmth above and coolness below create a lid, a ceiling of stability that dampens vertical motion and, with it, the horizontal winds that vertical mixing would otherwise generate. In this way, the atmosphere teaches us that stillness is not merely the absence of wind, but the presence of balance, a delicate arrangement of temperature and pressure that favors rest over restlessness. These stable layers form most reliably during the long nights of winter, when the ground radiates its heat away into the darkness of space, and the air, just above the surface, grows cold and dense. The cold air hugs the earth, reluctant to rise, while warmer air floats above it, creating an inversion that can persist for days if undisturbed. In polar regions, where winter nights stretch for months, these inversions can become semi-permanent features, locking the lowest atmosphere into a state of profound calm. The air becomes stratified like a layered cake, each horizontal slice maintaining its own temperature, its own density, its own reluctance to mix with the layers above or below. This stratification suppresses the turbulence that normally characterizes the atmosphere, the chaotic eddies and swirls that we experience as wind. Instead, the air settles into laminar flow, smooth and undisturbed, a liquid-like glide that carries no gusts, no sudden changes, only the slow drift of air masses moving as cohesive units. Within these stable layers, sound behaves differently, traveling farther and more clearly than it does in turbulent air. The absence of wind-generated noise and the smooth density gradients allow acoustic waves to propagate with unusual clarity, so that distant sounds arrive sharp and distinct, as if the landscape had contracted. In the polar night, researchers have reported hearing conversations from kilometers away, the voices carried across the ice with eerie precision. This acoustic transparency is one of the subtle gifts of windless air, a reminder that stillness is not emptiness, but a medium of unusual purity. The same stability that suppresses wind also suppresses the random scattering of sound waves, creating an environment where the atmosphere becomes almost crystalline in its acoustic properties. To stand in such a place is to experience a kind of sensory clarity rarely available in the wind-blown world, where every sound is masked or distorted by the movement of air. The formation of these stable layers depends not only on radiative cooling, but also on the moisture content of the air. Dry air cools more efficiently than moist air, because water vapor is a greenhouse gas that traps outgoing infrared radiation. In arid regions, clear nights can produce dramatic temperature inversions even in temperate latitudes, as the dry air allows heat to escape rapidly into space. The surface cools quickly, chilling the air in contact with it, while the air, just a few hundred meters above, remains relatively warm. This creates a sharp inversion, a distinct boundary between the cold lower layer and the warmer air above. In desert basins, these inversions can be so strong that the temperature difference between the surface and the air just 100 meters up exceeds 10 or even 15 degrees Celsius. This steep gradient stabilizes the atmosphere profoundly, creating conditions where even the slightest breeze at the surface is suppressed by the weight of the inversion above. The persistence of these inversions depends on the absence of external disturbances. A passing weather system, a change in wind direction aloft, or the arrival of daytime heating can all break down the stable layer, mixing the atmosphere and restoring turbulence. But in certain protected locations, inversions can persist for weeks, creating extended periods of windless calm. The valleys of Antarctica, the deep basins of Central Asia, and the sheltered fjords of the Arctic all experience these prolonged inversions, where the atmosphere settles into a state of near permanence. During these periods, the air quality can deteriorate if pollutants are present, as the lack of mixing traps emissions near the surface. But in pristine environments, the inversion simply preserves the silence, holding the air in a state of suspended animation where time seems to slow and the world grows preternaturally still. The study of these stable layers has revealed that the atmosphere is not a single, well-mixed entity, but a collection of distinct layers, each with its own characteristics and behaviors. The boundary layer, the lowest portion of the atmosphere in direct contact with the surface, can be only a few dozen meters thick under strong inversions, a thin skin of air pressed against the earth. Above this lies the residual layer, a zone of air that was mixed during the previous day, but has since become decoupled from the surface. Higher still, the free atmosphere flows according to large-scale pressure gradients, largely unaffected by surface conditions. In windless places, these layers become sharply defined, each maintaining its own temperature, humidity, and stillness. The result is an atmosphere that is less a fluid continuum and more a stack of distinct domains, each operating according to its own quiet logic. This layering has profound implications for the organisms that live within it. Insects, for example, navigate these layers with precision, seeking out the altitudes where temperature and wind conditions are most favorable. On calm nights, certain moths and beetles fly within the stable boundary layer, where the air is still and cool, avoiding the stronger winds that flow above the inversion. Birds, too, adjust their flight altitudes in response to atmospheric stability, often flying just above the inversion where the air is smoother and more predictable. The atmosphere, in its stillness, becomes a landscape of niches, each layer offering different conditions and opportunities. This vertical stratification is as important to aerial life as the horizontal geography of mountains and valleys is to terrestrial life, a three-dimensional architecture that shapes the possibilities of movement and survival. The formation of stable layers is not limited to nighttime or winter conditions. In some locations, persistent high-pressure systems create inversions that last through the day, sustained by large-scale subsidence of air from the upper atmosphere. As air descends, it compresses and warms, creating a layer of warm air aloft, even as the surface remains cooler. This subsidence inversion is common in subtropical high-pressure zones, where the descending branch of the Hadley circulation creates stable conditions over vast oceanic regions. The result is a persistent cap on vertical motion, a lid that prevents clouds from forming and convection from developing. The air beneath this cap can be remarkably still, especially over the ocean, where surface friction is minimal. Sailors have long known these regions as the horse latitudes, zones of frustrating calm where winds fail and voyages stall. These subtropical calms are different in character from the polar inversions, warmer and more humid, but equally effective at suppressing wind. The descending air creates a stable layer at an altitude of 1 to 2 kilometers, well above the surface, but low enough to dominate the behavior of the lower atmosphere. Beneath this inversion, the air is often hazy, filled with dust and sea salt that cannot rise into the clearer air above. The sky takes on a pale, washed-out appearance, and the horizon becomes indistinct, blurred by the accumulated particles suspended in the stagnant air. This haziness is a visible signature of atmospheric stability, a sign that the air has been still long enough for particles to accumulate and linger. In these regions, the ocean surface can remain glassy for days, the water reflecting the pale sky in a seamless continuum that disorients the eye and challenges the sense of scale. The persistence of these high-pressure calms depends on the larger patterns of atmospheric circulation, the slow drift of pressure systems, and the seasonal shifts in the jet stream. When a high-pressure system stalls over a region, it can maintain stable conditions for weeks, creating extended periods of windless weather. These blocking highs, as meteorologists call them, resist the usual west-to-east flow of weather systems, anchoring themselves in place and diverting storms around their periphery. Within the core of the high, the air is still and the skies are clear, day after day, with only the slow rotation of the sun marking the passage of time. These are the weather patterns that create heat waves in summer and cold snaps in winter, prolonged episodes of extreme conditions made possible by the absence of wind and the persistence of stable air. The human experience of these prolonged calms is one of monotony and, paradoxically, heightened awareness. When the weather refuses to change, when each day dawns clear and still and identical to the last, time seems to lose its usual markers. The absence of wind, the unchanging sky, the relentless sameness of the conditions create a kind of temporal flattening, where days blur together and the sense of progression fades. Yet this very monotony can sharpen attention to subtle details, the small variations in light and temperature that would otherwise go unnoticed. The angle of the sun, the quality of the morning air, the faint shifts in humidity become significant in the absence of more dramatic changes. In this way, windless periods can cultivate a contemplative awareness, a noticing of the small and the gradual that the restless weather of more variable climates tends to obscure. The breaking of a prolonged calm, when it finally comes, is often dramatic. The arrival of a weather front, the shift in wind direction, the sudden mixing of the atmosphere can feel like a release, a return to motion after a long stillness. The wind, when it finally blows, carries with it the scent of distant places, the moisture of approaching rain, the promise of change. The inversion breaks, the stable layers mix, and the atmosphere returns to its more typical state of turbulence and variability. But the memory of the calm lingers, a reminder that the atmosphere is capable of stillness as well as storm, of rest as well as restlessness. The windless periods, though temporary, reveal a fundamental capacity of the atmosphere, a mode of being that is as natural and as important as the more conspicuous movements we call weather. The study of atmospheric stability has also revealed the importance of small-scale features in creating and maintaining windless conditions. Even within a generally stable atmosphere, tiny variations in surface temperature, vegetation, or topography can create microclimates of exceptional calm. A small depression in the ground, a cluster of trees, a patch of bare rock can each generate its own microclimate, a pocket of air that behaves differently from its surroundings. These microclimates are often only a few meters across, but they can be significantly calmer or more turbulent than the surrounding air. In windless regions, these microclimates become particularly distinct as the absence of strong winds allows subtle differences to persist and intensify. A cold air pool can form in a small hollow. A warm pocket can develop on a sun-facing slope, each creating its own local conditions within the larger stillness. These microclimates are important to the organisms that inhabit them, providing refuges from extreme conditions and opportunities for specialized adaptations. A spider might spin its web in a particularly calm corner, where the air is still enough to allow the delicate structure to remain undisturbed. A plant might establish itself in a microclimate where frost is less frequent or moisture more available, gaining an advantage over competitors in the surrounding area. The landscape, at this scale, becomes a mosaic of tiny climatic zones, each with its own character and its own inhabitants. The windless places, in their stillness, allow these microclimates to become sharply defined, creating a fine-grained diversity that would be smoothed over in windier environments. The measurement of these microclimates requires sensitive instruments and careful observation. Traditional weather stations, with their instruments mounted several meters above the ground, miss much of the variation that occurs at the scale of centimeters and meters. Researchers studying microclimates often deploy arrays of small sensors, measuring temperature, humidity, and wind speed at many points across a small area. These measurements reveal a world of variation invisible to conventional meteorology, a landscape of thermal pockets and air currents that shift with the angle of the sun and the cooling of the night. In windless places, these measurements show that stillness is not uniform but textured, composed of layers and gradients and local circulations that operate at scales too small to be called wind, but too significant to be ignored. The concept of the boundary layer, which we have touched on before, becomes particularly important in understanding these small-scale phenomena. The boundary layer is the zone where the atmosphere interacts directly with the surface, where friction, heating, and cooling create turbulence and mixing. In windy conditions, the boundary layer can extend hundreds or even thousands of meters into the atmosphere, a deep zone of turbulent air. But in calm conditions, the boundary layer shrinks dramatically, sometimes to just a few meters or even less. This thin boundary layer is where the microclimates form, where the surface exerts its strongest influence on the air. Within this layer, temperature gradients can be steep, humidity can vary dramatically over short distances, and the air can be almost motionless, clinging to the surface like skin. The thinness of the boundary layer in calm conditions has implications for how we experience the environment. When a boundary layer is only a meter or two thick, the air at head height can be significantly different from the air at ground level. Standing up, you might feel warmer air, while sitting or lying down, you might feel the cooler air pulled to the surface. This vertical gradient is a direct consequence of the stillness, the lack of mixing that would normally homogenize the air. In windless places, these gradients can be pronounced enough to be felt distinctly, a reminder that the atmosphere is not a uniform blanket, but a layered structure that we move through as we go about our lives. The study of the boundary layer has also revealed the importance of surface roughness in generating or suppressing turbulence. A smooth surface, like a frozen lake or a salt flat, generates minimal friction and allows air to flow smoothly across it, maintaining laminar flow even when the air is in motion. A rough surface, like a forest or a city, generates turbulence, breaking up the flow and creating eddies and gusts. In windless places, the surfaces are often smooth, either naturally, like the salt flats and ice sheets, or effectively smooth by the absence of vegetation, as in the deserts and high plateaus. This smoothness contributes to the calm, reducing the turbulence that would otherwise disturb the air. The result is a feedback loop, where the stillness of the air allows smooth surfaces to remain undisturbed, and the smooth surfaces reinforce the stillness of the air. The interaction between the atmosphere and the surface is not one-way, but reciprocal, a continuous exchange of energy, moisture, and momentum. In windless places, this exchange is minimized, creating conditions where the atmosphere and the surface can each maintain their own characteristics without being strongly influenced by the other. The surface cools or warms according to the balance of incoming and outgoing radiation, while the atmosphere above responds slowly, if at all, to these changes. This decoupling is most pronounced under strong inversions, where the stable layer acts as a barrier, preventing the surface conditions from propagating upward. The result is a kind of atmospheric isolation, where the surface and the air above it exist in separate thermal worlds, each following its own trajectory. This isolation has implications for the energy balance of the surface. In the absence of wind, the primary mechanisms for transferring heat away from the surface are radiation and conduction, both of which are relatively slow compared to convection. A surface exposed to intense sunlight can become very hot, as there is no wind to carry the heat away. Conversely, a surface exposed to the cold night sky can become very cold, as there is no wind to bring warmer air from elsewhere. The result is extreme temperature swings, with surfaces in windless places experiencing some of the largest diurnal temperature ranges on Earth. The sand of the Sahara, the rocks of the Atacama, the ice of Antarctica all exhibit these extreme swings, heating and cooling dramatically in the absence of the moderating influence of wind. The human body, too, responds to the absence of wind in ways that can be surprising. Wind increases the rate of heat loss from the skin through convection, making cold air feel colder and hot air feel hotter. In windless conditions, the air around the body becomes a thin, insulating layer, reducing heat loss in cold environments and reducing heat gain in hot environments. This can make windless cold feel less severe than windy cold at the same temperature, and windless heat feel less oppressive than windy heat. The body's thermoregulation, which relies partly on the evaporation of sweat, is also affected by the stillness. In dry, windless air, sweat evaporates slowly, allowing the body to cool efficiently without losing excessive moisture. In humid, windless air, sweat evaporates very slowly, and the body can struggle to cool itself, leading to discomfort even at moderate temperatures. The psychological experience of windlessness is equally important, though less often studied. The absence of wind removes one of the primary sources of environmental stimulation, the constant tactile sensation of air moving across the skin, the sound of wind in the ears, the visual movement of leaves and grasses. In windless conditions, the world becomes sensorially quieter, less dynamic, more static. For some, this stillness is deeply calming, a relief from the constant stimulation of a wind-blown world. For others, it can be unsettling, a kind of sensory deprivation that makes the environment feel unnatural or oppressive. The response is individual, shaped by temperament, experience, and cultural context. But the windless places, in their stillness, offer an opportunity to experience the world in a mode that is increasingly rare in our wind-filled lives. The cultural responses to windless places are as varied as the places themselves. In some traditions, stillness is associated with peace, contemplation, and spiritual clarity. The windless places become sites of pilgrimage, meditation, and retreat, valued precisely for their quietness and their separation from the turbulent world. In other traditions, stillness is associated with stagnation, death, and the absence of life. The windless places are seen as barren and inhospitable, to be avoided or crossed as quickly as possible. These different responses reflect deeper cultural values about motion and stillness, activity and rest, the dynamic and the static. The windless places, in their neutrality, become screens onto which we project our own meanings and values. The scientific study of windless places has also contributed to our understanding of climate change and atmospheric dynamics. The regions of persistent calm, the areas where inversions form most readily, the places where the atmosphere is most stable are all sensitive indicators of changes in the larger climate system. As the planet warms, the patterns of atmospheric stability are shifting, with some regions becoming more stable and others less so. The polar regions, in particular, are experiencing changes in inversion frequency and intensity as the warming of the Arctic alters the temperature gradients that drive these phenomena. The windless places, in their sensitivity, serve as early warning systems, revealing changes in the atmosphere that might not yet be apparent in more variable regions. The measurement of wind, or its absence, has a long history in meteorology, evolving from simple observations to sophisticated instrumental networks. The earliest wind measurements were qualitative, based on visible effects like the movement of smoke or the bending of trees. The Beaufort scale, developed in the early 19th century, codified these observations into a numerical scale, with 0 representing calm and higher numbers representing increasing wind speeds. Modern anemometers measure wind speed and direction with precision, using mechanical, acoustic, or optical methods to detect even the slightest motion of the air. In windless places, these instruments often register 0 or near 0 readings for extended periods, confirming what the body already senses, that the air is profoundly still. The definition of calm in meteorology is typically a wind speed of less than 1 kilometer per hour, a threshold below which the air is considered essentially motionless. But even within this definition, there are gradations of stillness. Air moving at half a kilometer per hour is technically calm, but it is not as still as air moving at 1/10 of a kilometer per hour. The most profound calms the deepest stillnesses, occur when the air is moving so slowly that it is difficult to measure, when the anemometer registers zero for hours or days at a time. These are the conditions that define the windless places, the regions where the atmosphere has truly come to rest. The distribution of these profound calms across the planet is not random, but reflects the underlying patterns of atmospheric circulation and geography. The polar regions, the deep desert basins, the sheltered valleys, the subtropical ocean gyres, all are places where the conditions for stillness align. But there are also smaller, more localized, windless zones, pockets of calm that exist within otherwise windy regions. A sheltered courtyard in a windy city, a lee-side hollow in a mountain range, a small island in the path of the trade winds, each can create its own microclimate of stillness. These pockets are often ephemeral, lasting only as long as the larger wind patterns remain stable. But they offer brief respites from the motion, moments of calm within the turbulence. The experience of finding such a pocket, of stepping from a windy, exposed area into a sheltered calm, is one of sudden relief and heightened awareness. The contrast between motion and stillness is immediate and visceral, a shift that the body registers before the mind fully comprehends it. The cessation of the wind removes a layer of sensory noise, allowing other sounds and sensations to emerge. The warmth of the sun, the scent of the earth, the distant call of a bird, all become more noticeable in the absence of the wind's distraction. These moments of calm, though brief, offer a glimpse into the experience of the windless places, a taste of the stillness that defines them. The windless places, in their diversity and their stillness, invite us to reconsider our relationship with the atmosphere. We tend to think of air as a medium of motion, a carrier of wind and weather, a force that shapes the landscape and challenges our bodies. But air is also capable of stillness, of rest, of a quietness that is as fundamental to its nature as its capacity for storm. The windless places remind us that the atmosphere is not always in motion, that there are times and places where it settles into a profound calm, where the air becomes a presence rather than a force, a medium of clarity rather than turbulence. To visit these places, or even to imagine them, is to encounter a different mode of atmospheric being, one that challenges our assumptions and expands our sense of what the air can be. The scientific study of these places continues to reveal new insights into the behavior of the atmosphere, the interactions between air and surface, and the conditions that create and maintain stillness. Each windless place is a natural laboratory, a setting where the variables that usually complicate atmospheric dynamics are simplified or removed, allowing researchers to isolate and study specific processes. The inversions of the polar night, the subsidence of the subtropical highs, the topographic sheltering of mountain valleys, each offers a different perspective on the mechanisms of calm. Together, these studies are building a more complete picture of the atmosphere, one that includes not only its storms and its winds, but also its silences and its stillnesses. The technology for studying windless places has advanced significantly in recent decades, with satellite observations, remote sensing, and high-resolution modeling all contributing to our understanding. Satellites can detect the subtle signatures of atmospheric stability, the temperature profiles, and the absence of cloud formation that indicate calm conditions. Remote sensing instruments can measure wind speed and direction from distance, mapping the distribution of calm across large regions. Computer models can simulate the formation and evolution of inversions, the flow of air in sheltered valleys, the behavior of the boundary layer under stable conditions. These tools have made it possible to study windless places in unprecedented detail, revealing patterns and processes that were previously invisible. Yet for all the technological advances, the most profound understanding of windless places still comes from direct experience, from spending time in these environments and attending to their subtleties. The instruments can measure temperature and wind speed, but they cannot capture the quality of the silence, the texture of the stillness, the way the air feels against the skin. These experiential dimensions are essential to a full appreciation of windless places, and they remind us that scientific knowledge, however detailed, is only one way of knowing. The windless places invite us to engage not only with our instruments and our models, but also with our senses and our intuition, to learn from the atmosphere in a more holistic and embodied way. The future of windless places is uncertain in a changing climate. As the planet warms, the patterns of atmospheric circulation are shifting, and with them, the conditions that create calm. Some windless places may become windier, as changing pressure gradients and temperature patterns alter the flow of air. Others may become even stiller, as new configurations of stability emerge. The polar regions, in particular, are experiencing rapid changes, with the warming of the Arctic potentially reducing the frequency and intensity of the strong inversions that create the profound calms of the polar night. The desert basins and mountain valleys may be more stable, their windlessness rooted in topography that will not change. But even these places will feel the effects of a changing climate through altered precipitation patterns, shifting temperature ranges, and changes in vegetation. The windless places, in their vulnerability and their resilience, serve as indicators of the health of the atmosphere and the stability of the climate system. Their stillness is not a static feature, but a dynamic balance, maintained by the interplay of many factors. As those factors shift, the windless places will shift as well, some perhaps disappearing, others emerging in new locations. The study of these places and the care we take to preserve them is part of the larger work of understanding and protecting the planet's climate. The stillness they offer is not only a scientific curiosity or a source of personal peace, but also a reminder of the delicate balance that makes life on Earth possible. As we move deeper into this exploration, the windless places reveal themselves not as empty or barren, but as rich with meaning and complexity. Their stillness is an active quality, a presence that shapes the landscape, the organisms, and the human experience. To understand these places is to understand a fundamental aspect of the atmosphere, its capacity for rest, for balance, for a quietness that is as essential as its motion. The windless places are not anomalies, but integral parts of the planetary system, zones where the atmosphere reveals a different face, a gentler mode of being. In their stillness, they offer us a gift, a chance to slow down, to listen, to attend to the subtle and the quiet, to find in the absence of wind a presence that is deeply calming and profoundly instructive. The windless places we have visited together form a quiet constellation across the planet, each one a pocket of stillness held within the great flowing ocean of air that surrounds us. These places are not random. They emerge from the interplay of geography, temperature, pressure, and time, each factor contributing to the hush that settles over certain landscapes. As we move toward rest ourselves, we can reflect on how these still places teach us about balance, about the conditions that allow motion to pause, about the beauty that emerges when the air forgets to move. In the high plateaus of Tibet, where the land rises so far above sea level that the atmosphere thins and the winds that rage across lower elevations lose their strength, there are valleys where the air becomes surprisingly calm. The Tibetan Plateau, often called the roof of the world, experiences fierce winds across its open expanses, yet within its protected valleys and basins, sheltered by surrounding peaks, the air can settle into profound stillness. The thin atmosphere at these elevations means there is less air mass to move, and when that air is further confined by topography, it rests. Nomadic herders have known these calm pockets for centuries, seeking them as places to camp, to rest their animals, to escape the relentless winds that scour the high plains. The stillness here feels different from sea-level calm, lighter somehow, as if the air itself has less weight to press against your skin. The relationship between altitude and windlessness is not straightforward. While mountaintops are often windy, the valleys between peaks can be astonishingly calm, especially during stable weather patterns. The air within these valleys, cooled by radiation at night, becomes dense and settles, forming a stable layer that resists mixing with the air above. This creates what meteorologists call a mountain valley inversion, a condition where cold, still air fills the valley floor, while warmer, potentially windier air flows above. The valley becomes a basin of calm, insulated from the winds aloft by the temperature difference itself. This phenomenon occurs in mountain ranges worldwide, from the Alps to the Andes, from the Rockies to the Himalayas, creating temporary refuges of stillness in otherwise dynamic atmospheric conditions. In New Zealand's Southern Alps, certain valleys experience such profound calm during winter that fog forms and persists for days. The still air, unable to disperse the moisture. These fog-filled valleys become strange, quiet worlds where sound is muffled and visibility drops to a few meters. The stillness is so complete that you can hear your own heartbeat, the soft rustle of clothing, the faint drip of condensation from trees. Local Maori traditions speak of these mist-filled valleys as places where the boundary between the physical and spiritual worlds grows thin, where the stillness invites reflection and connection. The fog itself is a product of the windlessness, moisture condensing in the cold, motionless air, unable to be swept away or mixed with drier air from above. The phenomenon of fog in windless conditions reveals something essential about the atmosphere's behavior. Fog is simply a cloud that touches the ground, formed when air cools to its dew point and water vapor condenses into tiny droplets. In moving air, these droplets are dispersed or evaporated by mixing with drier air. But in still conditions, fog can form, thicken, and persist, creating environments of remarkable sensory quietness. Radiation fog, which forms on calm, clear nights when the ground cools rapidly, is among the most common types. The ground radiates heat into space, cooling the air directly above it until moisture condenses. Without wind to mix this cool, moist air with warmer, drier air above, the fog deepens and spreads, filling valleys and low-lying areas with its soft, white presence. In California's Central Valley, radiation fog can become so thick and persistent during winter that it affects transportation, agriculture, and daily life for weeks at a time. The valley's shape, a long trough between mountain ranges, combined with high-pressure systems that suppress wind, creates ideal conditions for fog formation. The fog is known locally as tule fog, named after the tule grass that grows in the valley's wetlands. It forms on cold winter nights when the air is calm and moist, and it can persist through the day if the sun is too weak to warm the ground enough to disperse it. Driving through tule fog is an exercise in patience and caution, visibility sometimes dropping to less than 10 meters, the world reduced to a small sphere of gray light moving slowly through whiteness. The stillness within fog has a psychological effect. Time seems to slow. The absence of visual reference points, combined with the muffling of sound, creates a sense of suspension, as if the normal rules of space and perception have been gently set aside. People report feeling both isolated and strangely peaceful in thick fog. The world shrunk to immediate surroundings, the pressure of distant concerns softened by the inability to see beyond the present moment. This is windlessness made visible, the calm air holding moisture in place, creating a tangible manifestation of stillness that we can walk through, breathe, feel on our skin. In the Arctic, a different kind of fog forms in windless conditions. Arctic sea smoke, or frost smoke, occurs when extremely cold air moves over relatively warmer water, or when open water is exposed to frigid air in otherwise calm conditions. The water evaporates into the cold air, immediately condensing into fog that rises in wisps and columns, resembling smoke. This fog forms only in very calm conditions. Even slight winds would disperse it. The sight of sea smoke rising in the Arctic twilight, columns of mist ascending slowly in perfectly still air, is one of nature's most ethereal displays. The stillness required for its formation makes it a rare gift, a reminder that even in the polar regions, where winds are often fierce, moments of perfect calm occur. The formation of frost itself is intimately connected to windlessness. Frost forms when water vapor in the air deposits directly onto cold surfaces, skipping the liquid phase entirely, a process called deposition. This happens most readily on calm, clear nights when surfaces cool rapidly through radiation and there is no wind to bring in warmer air or to disrupt the thin layer of moisture-saturated air next to the cold surface. The intricate patterns of frost crystals, those delicate ferns and flowers of ice that appear on windows and grass blades, are products of stillness. Wind would prevent their formation or break them apart. Each frost crystal is a tiny sculpture made possible by the absence of motion, a collaboration between cold, moisture, and calm. In Siberia, Where winter temperatures plunge far below freezing and high-pressure systems bring extended periods of calm, frost forms with spectacular complexity. Hoarfrost, a type of frost that creates large, feathery crystals, develops when water vapor deposits on its surfaces over many hours or days of calm, cold conditions. The crystals grow slowly, molecule by molecule, building elaborate structures that catch the low winter light. Entire forests become coated in hoarfrost during prolonged calm spells, every branch and needle outlined in white. The landscape transformed into something from a fairy tale. The stillness required for this transformation is absolute. Even a gentle breeze would prevent the crystals from forming or would shake them from their perches. The relationship between windlessness and ice extends to the formation of ice on lakes and ponds. In calm conditions, ice forms smoothly and clearly, creating what is called black ice because you can see through it to the dark water below. This clear ice forms when water freezes slowly and evenly, without wind to create waves or to mix warmer water from below with colder water at the surface. The result is ice of remarkable clarity and strength, favored by ice fishers and skaters. In contrast, ice that forms during windy conditions tends to be cloudy and fractured, full of air bubbles and irregularities. The stillness of the air above allows the stillness of the water below, and together they create ice that is both beautiful and functional. In the far north of Canada, in the Northwest Territories, there are lakes that freeze in such calm conditions that the ice becomes a window into the underwater world. Standing on this clear ice, you can see fish swimming below, aquatic plants swaying in the slow currents, the sandy or rocky bottom meters beneath your feet. The experience is vertiginous and magical, made possible entirely by the absence of wind during the freezing process. Local indigenous peoples have long used the quality of ice as an indicator of weather conditions, reading in its clarity or cloudiness the story of the winds, or lack of winds, that prevailed during its formation. The silence of windless winter landscapes has inspired artists, writers, and composers for centuries. The hush of a snow-covered field on a calm winter day, when every sound is absorbed by the snow and there is no rustle of wind to break the quiet, creates a sense of peace that feels almost sacred. This silence is not empty. It is full of subtle sounds that normally go unheard. The creak of tree branches contracting in the cold, the soft settling of snow, the distant call of a bird. The absence of wind allows these small sounds to emerge, to be noticed and appreciated. In this way, windlessness is not just the absence of something. It is the presence of quiet, which is a thing unto itself. In Japan, the concept of ma, often translated as negative space or the space between things, relates beautifully to the idea of windlessness. Ma is the pause, the silence, the emptiness that gives meaning to fullness. In traditional Japanese gardens, carefully designed spaces create pockets of calm where wind is blocked or channeled, where the air is allowed to rest. These calm spaces invite contemplation, providing relief from the sensory stimulation of the outside world. The deliberate creation of windless spaces within a garden is an acknowledgement that stillness has value, that the absence of motion can be as important as motion itself. The architectural traditions of many cultures include features designed to create or enhance windless spaces. Courtyards, cloisters, atriums, and inner gardens are all designed to provide shelter from wind, creating calm microclimates within buildings or building complexes. In hot climates, these windless spaces can be cooler than the surrounding areas if they are shaded, and if their design promotes the settling of cool air. In cold climates, windless courtyards can be warmer, protected from the wind chill that makes outdoor spaces uncomfortable. The human desire for shelter from wind is ancient and universal, reflected in the architecture of every culture that has had to contend with windy conditions. In the traditional courtyard houses of China, called sihiyuan, the central courtyard is surrounded by buildings on all four sides, creating a protected space where wind is greatly reduced. This courtyard becomes the heart of the home, a place where family members gather, where plants grow, where the sky is visible but the wind is kept at bay. The design creates a microclimate that is more stable than the surrounding environment, warmer in winter, cooler in summer, and always calmer. The psychological effect of having a private outdoor space that is protected from wind cannot be overstated. It provides a sense of security and peace, a refuge from the unpredictability of weather. In the Middle East, traditional architecture includes wind towers or bargeal, which might seem contradictory to the idea of creating windless spaces. But their function is actually to control and direct wind, creating calm zones within buildings while using wind to ventilate and cool other areas. The wind tower captures breezes from above and channels them down into the building, but the design also includes spaces where air is allowed to settle and cool, creating pockets of stillness. The mastery of wind, including the creation of windlessness where desired, is a hallmark of traditional architecture in windy regions. The relationship between humans and windlessness extends to our physiology. Our bodies are constantly exchanging heat with the environment, and wind affects this exchange dramatically. In cold conditions, wind increases heat loss, creating wind chill. In hot conditions, wind increases evaporative cooling, making us feel cooler. In windless conditions, our bodies reach thermal equilibrium with the environment more slowly, and we feel the temperature more directly, without the modifying effect of moving air. This is why a hot, windless day can feel oppressively still, the air heavy and unmoving against the skin, while a cold, windless day can feel less harsh than a windy one at the same temperature. In extremely windless conditions, the boundary layer of air around our bodies, warmed or cooled by our skin, remains undisturbed. This layer acts as insulation, reducing heat exchange with the surrounding air. In cold, windless conditions, this can actually make us feel warmer than the ambient temperature would suggest, as long as we're not losing heat through radiation or conduction to cold surfaces. In hot, windless conditions, this boundary layer can become uncomfortably warm, and we feel the need to move, to create our own breeze, to disrupt the still air that clings to us. The sensation of windlessness on the skin is subtle but distinct. It is the absence of the light pressure and cooling effect of moving air, the absence of the constant micro-adjustments our bodies make in response to changing airflow. In profound stillness, the air feels neutral, neither pushing nor pulling, simply present. This can be deeply relaxing, removing a source of sensory stimulation that we are usually not consciously aware of. It can also feel strange, even unsettling, if we are accustomed to the presence of at least some air movement. Our comfort with windlessness varies, influenced by temperature, humidity, and personal preference. In traditional meditation practices from various cultures, finding or creating a windless space is often considered important. The distraction of wind, the movement of air across the skin, the sounds of wind in trees or around buildings can make it harder to achieve the inner stillness that meditation seeks. A calm, windless space supports a calm, still mind. Meditation halls, whether in Buddhist temples, Zen gardens, or yoga studios, are often designed to minimize drafts and air movement, creating an environment where the external stillness supports internal quiet. The concept of windlessness appears in spiritual and philosophical traditions as a metaphor for inner peace. A mind undisturbed by the winds of desire, anger, or confusion is described in Buddhist texts as being like a calm lake or a windless sky. The external experience of windlessness, the physical sensation of still air, can serve as a reminder or a teacher, showing us what inner stillness might feel like. This connection between external and internal calm is not merely poetic. Our nervous systems respond to environmental stillness with relaxation. Our breathing slows, our muscles ease, our minds quiet. In the practice of forest bathing, or Shinrin-yoku, which originated in Japan, practitioners are encouraged to find calm, quiet places in forests where they can sit or walk slowly, absorbing the atmosphere of the forest. While not explicitly seeking windless conditions, the practice naturally leads people to sheltered spots where wind is reduced, where the air is still enough to carry the subtle scent of trees and soil, where the sounds of the forest are not masked by the noise of wind. The stillness enhances the sensory experience, allowing for deeper connection with the natural world. The scent of forests, that complex mixture of compounds released by trees, soil, and plants, is more noticeable in calm air, Wind disperses scents quickly, diluting them and carrying them away. In still air, scents linger and concentrate, creating a richer olfactory experience. The Japanese have identified specific compounds released by trees, called phytoncides, which have been shown to have beneficial effects on human health, reducing stress and boosting immune function. Breathing these compounds in a calm forest, where the air is still enough to hold them, may be one reason why forest bathing is so relaxing and restorative. In wine-growing regions around the world, winemakers pay close attention to wind patterns and windless periods. Grapes develop different characteristics, depending on the air movement around them. Too much wind can stress vines and damage fruit, but some air movement is necessary to prevent fungal diseases and to moderate temperature. The ideal is often a balance, with calm conditions during certain growth stages and gentle breezes at others. Some of the world's finest wines come from valleys and slopes where the wind is naturally moderated, where the air moves enough to keep vines healthy, but not so much as to stress them. The terroir, that untranslatable French term encompassing all the environmental factors that affect a crop, includes the wind regime and, by extension, the periods of windlessness. In the Napa Valley of California, the pattern of winds and calms follows a daily rhythm during the growing season. Cool, moist air from San Francisco Bay is drawn into the valley during the afternoon, providing relief from heat and some air movement. But at night and in the early morning, the valley often becomes calm, the air settling and cooling, creating ideal conditions for grapes to rest and recover from the day's photosynthesis. This rhythm of movement and stillness, repeated day after day through the growing season, contributes to the character of the grapes and the wines made from them. The study of microclimates in agriculture has revealed that windless pockets within farms and orchards can be both beneficial and problematic. On one hand, calm areas may have less evaporation, retaining soil moisture better. On the other hand, they may be prone to frost damage as cold air settles in them on clear nights. Farmers learn to read their land, understanding where the calm spots are and how to use them or protect them. Smudge pots, wind machines, and other frost protection methods are often deployed in the calmest, coldest pockets of orchards, the places where windlessness allows frost to form most readily. In the high deserts of Argentina, where some of the world's highest elevation vineyards are found, the combination of intense sun, low humidity, and periods of calm creates unique growing conditions. The thin atmosphere at these elevations means that temperature swings between day and night are extreme, and during calm nights, the temperature can drop dramatically. The grapes experience this intense fluctuation, which concentrates sugars and flavors. The windless nights, cold and clear, are as important to the final wine as the sunny, warm days. The relationship between windlessness and plant life extends beyond agriculture to natural ecosystems. In windless environments, plants do not need to invest as much energy in structural support. Trees in sheltered valleys can grow with thinner trunks and more delicate branches than trees on exposed ridges. The shape of a tree, its height, its branching pattern, all reflect the wind regime it has experienced. In profoundly calm environments, plants can adopt forms that would be impossible in windy conditions, growing tall and slender, with large, delicate leaves. In the understory of tropical rainforests, where the canopy above blocks most wind, plants have evolved to thrive in nearly windless conditions. The air at ground level in a rainforest is typically still, humid, and warm. Plants here do not need wind for pollination. Instead, they rely on animals, or they use gravity, or they are self-pollinating. The leaves of understory plants are often large and thin, maximizing surface area for capturing the limited light that filters through the canopy. These leaves would be torn and damaged by wind, but in the calm understory, they can spread wide and flat. The phenomenon of leaf drip tips, common in rainforest plants, is partly a response to windless, humid conditions. These extended points at the tips of leaves allow water to drip off efficiently, preventing the growth of algae and fungi on the leaf surface. In a windy environment, water would be blown off leaves without the need for drip tips. But in the still, humid air of the rainforest understory, water accumulates, and the drip tip is an elegant solution, a small adaptation to windlessness. In the deep ocean, far from surface winds and currents, There are regions where water movement is minimal, where the stillness is measured in centimeters per hour rather than meters per second. These are not completely motionless. The ocean is never truly still. But compared to surface currents or tidal flows, these deep, slow regions are the oceanic equivalent of windless places. Here, in the abyssal plains, sediment settles slowly over millennia, building layers that record the history of the ocean and the planet. The stillness of the water allows this delicate record-keeping, each layer a page in a book written over millions of years. The creatures that live in these deep, calm waters have adapted to an environment where energy is scarce and movement is costly. Many are slow-moving or sessile, attached to the seafloor or drifting passively. The absence of strong currents means that food does not arrive quickly. It drifts down from the surface in a slow, steady rain of organoparticles called marine snow. The stillness of the deep ocean is a different kind of calm from atmospheric windlessness, but it shares the quality of allowing processes to unfold slowly, without disruption, over vast stretches of time. In the study of climate history, scientists drill cores from the deep ocean floor, extracting columns of sediment that can be analyzed to reveal past ocean conditions, temperature, chemistry, and life. The undisturbed layers in these cores, possible only because of the relative stillness of deep ocean water, provide some of our best records of Earth's climate over millions of years. The windlessness of the deep ocean, its protection from the turbulence of surface conditions, makes it an archive, a library of planetary history written in mud and shells and chemical traces. The concept of stillness in water extends to lakes and ponds during periods of calm. When wind ceases, the surface of a lake becomes mirror smooth, reflecting the sky and surrounding landscape with perfect clarity. This phenomenon, called a mirror calm, is one of nature's most peaceful sights. The water becomes a second sky, clouds drifting across its surface, mountains inverted in its depths. The stillness required for this reflection is profound. Even a slight breeze will ripple the surface and break the mirror. Photographers and artists seek out these moments, arriving at lakes in the early morning or late evening when winds are typically calmest. In the boundary between water and air, during mirror calm, there is a sense of symmetry and balance that is deeply satisfying to the human eye and mind. The reflection is not just a visual trick. It is a manifestation of stillness, a demonstration that when motion ceases, the world doubles, above and below meeting in perfect agreement. Standing at the shore of a mirror calm lake, it can be hard to tell where the real world ends and the reflection begins, a gentle confusion that invites contemplation of boundaries, reality, and perception. The stillness of water also affects sound. Water is an excellent conductor of sound, much better than air, and in calm water, sounds can travel long distances with little distortion. Whales and dolphins use this property to communicate across vast stretches of ocean, their calls traveling for hundreds of kilometers. In calm lakes and bays, sound from across the water can be heard with startling clarity. A voice, a bird call, the splash of fish. The absence of wind eliminates the background noise of waves and ripples, allowing these sounds to emerge clearly, creating an acoustic environment of remarkable transparency. In the Arctic and Antarctic, where the ocean surface can become calm between storms, the acoustic properties of the water are used by marine mammals to navigate and hunt under the ice. Seals, for instance, can hear the approach of predators or the calls of other seals from great distances in the still water beneath the ice. The stillness of the water, combined with the solid ice above, creates an acoustic environment that is both alien and fascinating, where sound behaves in ways that are difficult to imagine without experiencing them. The relationship between windlessness and ice extends to the formation of ice caves and ice formations within glaciers. Inside a glacier, the ice is protected from wind, and the air within crevasses and caves is typically still. This stillness allows for the formation of delicate ice crystals and formations that would be impossible in windy conditions. Explorers of ice caves describe an environment of profound silence and stillness, the thick ice walls blocking all sound from outside, the air inside motionless and cold. The beauty of ice caves, with their blue light and crystalline formations, is partly a product of this protected, windless environment. In the study of glaciers, scientists examine ice cores drilled from deep within ice sheets. These cores, like ocean sediment cores, contain layers that record atmospheric conditions over hundreds of thousands of years. Tiny bubbles trapped in the ice contain samples of ancient air, allowing scientists to measure past levels of carbon dioxide and other gases. The preservation of these bubbles requires that the ice remain undisturbed, which it does in the deep, still interior of ice sheets, far from the surface where wind and weather cause mixing and disturbance. The windlessness of the deep ice, its isolation from atmospheric turbulence, makes it another archive of climate history. The Antarctic ice sheet, the largest mass of ice on Earth, contains ice that is nearly 1 million years old in its deepest layers. This ice formed from snow that fell during a time when the atmosphere and climate were very different from today. The stillness of the ice sheet's interior, where accumulation is slow and conditions are stable, has preserved this ancient ice intact. Scientists traveling to the interior of Antarctica to drill these deep cores work in some of the most windless conditions on Earth during rare calm periods, though they must also contend with some of the planet's fiercest winds at other times. The contrast between the violent storms and the profound calms of Antarctica is one of the region's defining characteristics. The psychological impact of experiencing profound windlessness in extreme environments like Antarctica is significant. Explorers and scientists report that the calm periods, when the wind stops after days or weeks of constant gales, bring a sense of relief and peace that is almost overwhelming. The absence of the constant roar of wind, the cessation of the physical buffeting, the sudden ability to hear one's own thoughts, all of this contributes to a feeling of release. In these moments, the landscape reveals itself in stillness. The subtle colors of ice and sky become visible, and the vastness of the continent can be appreciated without the distraction of struggling against the wind. The contrast between wind and calm is part of what makes windless places so remarkable. If the air were always still, we might not notice or appreciate the stillness. It is the experience of wind, the struggle against it, the way it shapes our movements and demands our attention, that makes calm so precious. In regions where wind is the norm, the arrival of calm is an event, a gift, a chance to rest, and to experience the environment in a different way. In the study of attention and awareness, there is a concept called habituation, where we stop noticing stimuli that are constant and unchanging. We habituate to the presence of wind if it blows constantly, just as we habituate to the hum of a refrigerator or the sound of traffic. But when the wind stops, we notice. The sudden absence breaks our habituation, and we become aware of the stillness. This is one reason why windless moments can feel so striking and memorable. They represent a change, a break in the pattern, and our brains are wired to notice change. The appreciation of windlessness, then, is partly about contrast and change, but it is also about the intrinsic qualities of stillness itself. Stillness allows for clarity, visual, auditory, mental. It reduces the sensory load on our nervous systems, giving us space to notice subtler things. It creates conditions where delicate phenomena can occur and persist. It invites us to slow down, to match our internal pace to the external calm. As we near the end of our journey through the windless places of Earth, we can reflect on what these places have shown us. They have revealed that stillness is not emptiness, but a state of balance, a condition that arises when forces are in equilibrium. They have shown us that windlessness shapes landscapes, ecosystems, and human experiences in profound ways. They have taught us that the absence of motion is not the absence of life or interest, but rather the presence of a different kind of richness, one that requires patience and attention to perceive. The windless places are scattered across the globe, from the coldest ice sheets to the hottest deserts, from the depths of ocean basins to the heights of mountain valleys. They are temporary, arising during certain conditions and disappearing when those conditions change, or they are permanent, protected by geography from the winds that blow elsewhere. Each one is unique, shaped by its particular combination of location, topography, temperature, and atmospheric conditions. Yet they share a common quality, that profound hush, that sense of the air holding its breath. In our own lives, we can seek out moments of stillness, pockets of calm in the midst of motion and noise. We can create windless spaces in our homes and gardens, places where the air is allowed to rest, where we can sit quietly and feel the absence of rush and pressure. We can visit natural windless places, experiencing firsthand the peace that comes from standing in air that is not moving, from hearing the world without the interference of wind. These experiences can be restorative, reminding us that stillness is possible, that calm is real, that the world is not always in motion. The science of windless places is the science of stability, of equilibrium, of the conditions that allow the atmosphere to rest. It is a science that requires patience and careful observation, because windlessness is often subtle and easily overlooked. It is a science that connects to many other fields: meteorology, climatology, ecology, oceanography, human physiology, psychology, architecture, agriculture. The study of where and why the wind stops teaches us about how the Earth's systems work, how energy moves through the atmosphere, how life adapts to different conditions, how humans have learned to live in every environment the planet offers. As we settle into our own stillness tonight, preparing for sleep, we can carry with us the images and ideas from these windless places. We can imagine the cold, dense air of the McMurdo Dry Valleys, resting in place for months. We can picture the mirror-calm surface of a mountain lake at dawn, perfectly reflecting the sky. We can recall the silence of a desert basin at midday, the air too hot and stable to move. We can think of the fog-filled valley, the world reduced to soft whiteness, sound muffled, time suspended. These places exist. They are real, and in their reality, they offer us something valuable. A reminder that stillness is part of the natural world, that calm is not something we must create artificially, but something that arises naturally when conditions are right. The windless places are teachers, showing us what is possible when motion ceases, when the air rests, when the world pauses.